I'd now like to introduce you to today's presenter, Kerry Smith. And let's see, here we go, there we go. Kerry joins GP Strategies with over 20 years of experience in senior roles working with Fortune 100 companies around the globe on engagement, transforming organizational culture, learning, and the employee experience. She's a lifelong learner herself, and her current sweet spot includes taking L&D from yesterday's organizational-driven formal learning to the future with learner-driven digital, on-demand, and adaptive learning ecosystems. So with that, Kerry, I'm going to go ahead and turn this session over to you.
Thank you, Kayla. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you coming today. And definitely, we have a packed agenda for the short time that we have together. But I also want to leave time at the end, as Kayla mentioned, for questions. So today we are really focusing in on what's really anchoring your content strategy, curation strategy. So we're going to talk a little bit about the content curation, what we mean by it first, because I think it's always good to level set because there seems to be lots of different definitions out there around that. And then how do you really anchor? What should you be anchoring it around? And what kind of mindsets maximize that experience as well? And then we'll wrap up with just showing you how we at GP actually execute on content strategy, curation strategies. So we'll give you a kind of a variety of things that we're looking at today. So as I mentioned, just to kind of level set where we are with how we're defining content curation is really, and I'm sure you've seen all the multitudes of definitions out there, and whatever maturity level you are within how you curate content or how you do it your organization, it really all boils down to searching, finding, filtering, and aggregating the content, the information that you're looking for. And I think there are two key pieces in this overall definition, though, is first, that it has to be with purpose. And with that, meaning it's got to fit an existing need that is out there, as well as be very contextual to what those needs are out there of your learner. So it's curation is got a lot of newsworthy publicists around it, but it really is something that is evolving as we see the whole modern learning environment evolve as well. Curation obviously has been around for a very, very long time, but how do we do it in today's world with the influx of all of the multitude of content availability out there and with all the new technologies that we have as well? So it's, even though it's not something that's necessarily easy to do, there's certainly a science and an art behind it. It is something that does help us to be able to broaden our solutions, and it also helps us to be able to be more efficient around how we do things. So I think when you think about creating your content curation strategy, what you really want to think about is where do you need to anchor that into? One of the first key components that you really need to make sure you're anchoring into are those key business challenges. If it doesn't result in satisfying a key business challenge, as in anything that we do with our solutions, we need to make sure that if it doesn't have that key component of the business challenge anchoring it, we need to do more digging. We need to do more questioning about what the moment of need is, where it's at, and what the end user experience is that we're trying to achieve. So here are just a sampling of business challenges that curation can help with. Obviously, there's a multitude of different types of business challenges that it can support. But I think some of these, when you think, these are probably the more common ones that we hear about, whether it be inefficiency and lack of information and knowledge that people are going after. A lot of times what you're hearing is it may not be the fact that they can't find the right information that they need to build skills and knowledge, but it's more that overwhelm that they're running into with the amount of content and the variety of different places that they can source content. So what we really focus in on here is calming that overwhelm, that moment of need, and helping them with a more efficient way to find the information that they need. And when you look at statistics out there, typically you'll see on average 9.5 hours a week are spent with people hunting for information. That's over a day lost in the work week. So when we think about it as bringing together a systematic approach to where people can find content, that's one piece of your strategy. And I think when you look at some of the other areas, staying relevant in the role, being more productive because they're able to find the skills and knowledge, all of this kind of comes back to thinking about what is the end experience you really want those learners to have. So as we create our content curation strategy, we want to be thinking about how can we let the learner lead in this process? How can we get content out there to them in a way that they can be more self-directed and it pushes into the flow of work versus always being something that is separated from their typical workflow throughout the day. We want it easily accessible. We want it taking them to further information as well, so opening up and helping them even move forward with their own curation. But I think what culminizes with that experience and what we want to think about in our strategy and anchor it back to is we really want to aim for frictionless experience for our learners and our performers when we start thinking about our content curation strategy. So again, lots of business challenges that we can start anchoring into, but I think that's one of the most important pieces you start thinking of when you create that strategy. And what I mean by strategy is really that method, that plan to get to that desired future. So whatever desired future, that learning experience, that frictionless experience we want our users, end users to experience, with our content that we're curating, we want to make sure that that's part of the strategy. That's the identified desired future. So when you think about what you have done with curation or what you see being done out there in your organization, what kind of challenges are you finding that you're experiencing with your curation strategies? So I'm going to open this up to everybody. You can respond in chat. What kind of things, snags are you running into, or what challenges have you run into in implementing curation within your organization or trying it yourself? How do you quantify the value back to the business? Great question. How do you sustain learning once the content is delivered? All of those great questions. So when we start thinking about how we're going to sustain learning, again, that's part of that ongoing curation. So when we curate content, as long as we are anchoring it into the business need, along with the other standards we're applying to that strategy, that is part of how do we keep people evolving. That means we need to keep curating, but we also need to curate in a way that leads people to other resources and other information out there. So it is kind of a self-fulfilling approach if you can curate effectively and you're using quality content. So I think that's one of the areas that we can do that. Quantifying is always one that comes up. Obviously, we're all aiming to quantify it back to the business. But I think when you look at what your strategy entails, those are the kind of things that you want to embed into that strategy is what are the key measurements that affect business outcome and performance outcomes? So is it the fact that people have simply consumed it, or is it more along the lines that you're seeing it shared, that content shared through various means? Or are they commenting and replying back to the piece of content that they've actually consumed? So those are some of the quantifiable pieces that you can go back to and then tie those back to, is that shifting behavior? Is that shifting performance in the business? So process to evaluate, keeping it current is always a dilemma, but that again needs to go back into your idea of what is your strategy? That's part of the standards and quality factors that you're going to be embedding into that, making sure that there is a maintenance, governance behind all of this. And how do you continue to evolve the content that's in there? And even though it may remain relevant for quite some time, how do you evolve it so people who have actually consumed it come back for more? So those are all the questions that you want to start addressing into that strategy. Getting buy-in from the upper management, another great question. So this comes back to having that strategy put in place and having it anchored back into your business challenges. If you can show upper management that, and there's lots of statistics out there in the Internet of Things around how curation has not only saved time in your learning development area, your learning organization, by being able to produce blended learning that has high quality. So you're reducing time spent on irrelevant types of activities or custom design that no longer is needed. So that's one way to get the buy-in from the upper management, but also the results. It's the social results, it's the consumption results, all of those when you see people actually consuming more content and sharing it with others and commenting and referencing, that's showing engagement. So those are a couple of the areas you can definitely tap into through upper management. So in the essence of time, great questions. We're going to take these. I'll address some of those questions in the blog afterwards that we'll follow up with, but I'm going to continue on to the next slide and just kind of talk through how do we maximize that experience with curation strategies. So understanding the mindsets around what makes curation strategy effective and what makes an individual, whether it be your learning professionals or even the consumer of curated content, look at things differently. The mindset of curiosity is, I think, one that goes hand in hand with effective curation and being able to see it for what it is from a user standpoint. So as I'm going through maybe a pathway or just some information that someone has curated and sent over to me, I go into that with an experimentation and a curiosity mindset. And those two pieces help me vet as I go through the content to get what I need out of it. Not necessarily that I need to judge that curated content based on the fact that it didn't give me every answer, or it maybe only was a synopsis of something from a bigger content piece. Those are the kind of things, if I got what I needed out of it in the moment of my need, or it's giving me the access to more quality content in that area, then to me, that's my curiosity and experimental mindset that I've gone into it with, and I take it for what that is. And that helps me become more self-directed in my own learning. I think the other critical mindset for your learning professionals who are beginning to curate or working in curation is really that this curation is about facilitating the learning experience. So the more we can embed in our strategy ways that we solidify the governance and the efficacy to the learner, the better that experience is going to be. So we really do need to think about what are the quality standards of the types of content that we want to include in our curation strategy. Do you want to set time limits or modality requirements around? Maybe it's even sourcing. What sources do we pull from? Do we only pull from certain sources that we know we have vetted or extreme high quality? Or is it a modality issue? Do we know our learners and our audience are more more appropriate to give them video or podcast or those type of curated content versus articles, or is it articles that people grab? It's knowing your culture, knowing your content, or knowing your user and what they're really looking for in their moment of need. So how do you know that? That's through the use. So whatever place you're storing the information, wherever you're driving people to get the content, those areas need to have ways that you can see how many times people are hitting on them, see if they're consuming them, see if they're passing it on or sharing it with others. All those pieces help you understand whether your strategy is working or whether you need to adjust that strategy. But again, it's important to understand that the governance piece around this is a critical piece to be able to keep the maintenance and keep it evolving in a healthy way. So how do we execute on the curation strategy? We really bring it to life through what we call our SHAPE model. And this model really helps us to help define with the audience what the intent and the time frame, success criteria, everything is around what they want to achieve with their curation strategy. We then start helping to guide in how do you filter, how do you aggregate that content that's of quality and set those standards. And then how do you advance that? Building prototypes, getting it out there, trialing it, testing it. And then we iterate, obviously. We keep coming back, proving better to each time we get feedback, get it into the cycle, get it into the maintenance, make sure you're applying that to your strategy so that you can continue to evolve it. So I know that's a very quick synopsis on curation strategies, so I will open it up, pass it back to Kayla, and open it up to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. I know that 20 minutes goes by really fast, and so thank you for getting that much information in that amount of time. So we do have 2 or so minutes left to get through some of the questions that came in. So just as a reminder, if you have a question for Kerry, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module at this time. Obviously, there's a lot that was covered and a lot that we could still discuss. So, Kerry, if you don't mind flipping it to that last slide, I want to make sure everybody has access to your contact. There we go. To your contact info. We encourage you to keep in touch with Kerry and with GP Strategies beyond today's session. And as I mentioned earlier, she's agreed to follow up with a blog post where she'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways. Definitely add any of those barriers that we talked about earlier. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask her, we'll be addressing those in that blog post. So keep those coming in. I'd also like to remind everyone that the recording and slides from today will be sent to the email address that you provided. So with that, Kerry, there's a question that came in that I do want to address, and that one is, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make in creating a content curation strategy?
I think, one of the biggest problems is not seeing your content curation strategy as part of a bigger, broader transformation. Obviously, it's the shift in the workforce, the future of work, all of that is driving a different way of how things are coming at us every day. How are we staying relevant in our role? So that broader transformation is really changing up the learning approach. And that's what's driving the need for content curation. And so I think without thinking of it as a part of your bigger transformation strategy that your learning organization is going through, I think that challenges you even more and minimizes the scope that you can really impact. So keeping in mind that business is changing, the way we are learning is changing, and all of those pieces need to factor in. The other side, I think, that I see people not get it communicated out to their audience. So that this is a different approach. It's a new way to learn, or at least for the organization might be a new way to learn. They're doing it in their everyday life already, but helping to communicate how they maximize that and how they can go about and access it and get more out of it, telling user stories around that is a fantastic way to organically grow some of that as well.
So this question is actually a good one, and this is a way that we, I know we always look at trying to reframe things too, but, are there business challenges where content curation isn't a good fit?
where it's not a good fit? Well,
Yeah.
I think, you know, and I saw a note on the last one too. How do you even get started with a heavy risk and governance model? You know, curation, if you're working in a compliance arena and high risk area, I think curation works. It has to, I think you're more limited in how you vet where the source of the information is coming from and how much freedom people have to go beyond where you're sending them to that particular content. So that's not necessarily a place that doesn't work, but it's a place where I think you need to think a little differently of it. Where it doesn't work necessarily is obviously when you have a environment where it's a heavy assessing type of skill set that you're trying to build, where you need to customize it to that individual group. And that's where we're going to step back and even though we may curate ourselves as learning professionals to bring together the end content, it doesn't come through to the end user as curated content. We create a customized program for them. And that's where I think some of the dividing line happens. We curate all the time, even when we're developing customized programs. And I think it's a difference of, are you curating and letting people experience it in a very curated manner, meaning it's stored and they're pointed there, they self-direct themselves there, they go out, they find more after consuming it, or is it a confined all-in-one package program that they actually consume? So I think there's a difference there.
Absolutely, and like you said, it's kind of all, it's curated to some degree. Well, I know we are a few minutes over. It doesn't look like we actually have any more questions that came in, so we're good to go there. I will leave this open for just a few minutes. If anyone does have a question for Kerry, be sure to enter that in the Q&A module, and we'll make sure to address that in the blog post. I'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you again to today's speaker, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us again for more of our webinars. We have upcoming topics such as mobile coaching, and actually on Monday, so just in a few days, we have a webinar on how to drive innovation from within. Registration is available at gpstrategies.com under webinars. I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.